Inzoi, a game that made us see the light at the end of the tunnel, but overnight just vanished. A path that could be trailed perfectly, but was just erased. A simulation game that made EA shake, and a game that threatened to change the simulation games market. Why? And when did it go wrong? Was it sabotage? Or was it just because the game couldn't satisfy its players? Today, we'll deep dive into that, but before I start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. They're important, my channel is still growing, and I'll pretty much appreciate that. Now that you've done that, let's start the video. The early access trap. When Inzoi dropped, the buzz was big. Finally, a sweating competitor for The Sims has arrived. A brand new, ultra-realistic game from a billion-dollar publisher. The kind of thing you don't see every day, but the thing is, it launched on early access. Now, here's the problem about early access. In theory, it's a way for developers to release a game before it's finished so players can test it, give feedback, and help shape the final product. In practice, especially when a massive publisher like Krafton does it, it often feels like you're paying full price for a privilege of beta testing. And in Inzoi's case, that's exactly what happened. For indie developers, early access makes sense. They often need that revenue to keep the lights on and hire more people. You know, you're backing off a work in progress and your money directly fuels its development. But Krafton, this multi-billion-dollar corporation with hundreds of staff and the backing of one of the biggest games in history, PUBG, they don't need early access for survival, they use it as a business strategy. The problem is, most casual gamers don't fully understand what early access means. They see a shiny trailer, a $40 price tag, and assume they're getting full thing, and why wouldn't they? The marketing didn't exactly scream and finished product, so players booted up Inzoi expecting a deep, feature-rich live sim, and instead, they got something that felt like a proof of content with a fresh coat of paint, missing features, bare bones interactions, set the mood instead of actually adult relationships, a beautiful but very empty world. With Inzoi, first impressions were everything, and early access sabotaged that first impression. Players tried it, felt underwhelmed, and moved on, and as we'll see later, most of them never came back. Unrealistic expectations and poor first impressions. Now let's talk about those expectations because they were sky high. Inzoi wasn't just marketed as a live sim. It was marketed as the next step forward for the genre. Crisp visuals, fully explorable open world, jobs that could actually play through in real life. It was like Krafton took a wish list of every Sims player dreams, features, and said, yeah, we'll do that. Except they didn't. One of the biggest tonal missteps right out of the gate was how sterile the game felt. Inzoi tried so hard to be family friendly that it ended up feeling less realistic than The Sims, and that's saying something. Relationships were sanitized. Woohoo wasn't even called woohoo. It was just setting the mood next to the bed. It's an ultra-realistic live sim where your digital partner sleeps in a towel and a giant pulsating heart floats over the mattress. Immersion completely shattered. Now, here's the problem. In real life, and even in modded Sims games, the most popular content isn't PG. People like spice, like drama, like realism, even messiness. But Inzoi aimed for the very clean, family-friendly vibes. In the game engine that screams real life, realism, reality, that disconnect made everything feel off. And beyond the tone, there's the gameplay loop problem, or rather, the lack of a gameplay loop. A good live sim needs a reason for you to keep coming back. Goals, challenges, progression systems. Inzoi's open world was gorgeous, but after a few hours, players were asking the same questions. Now what? It's the same issue for games like Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley, run into, except those games hook you with long-term progression, seasonal events, and addictive repetition. Inzoi didn't have that. It was most like a sandbox with a handful of toys and no instructions. Combine that with the early access issues we talked about, and you got a perfect recipe for player drop-off. One, you got sky-high expectations, you got bare bones reality, and you got a no compelling gameplay. It didn't matter how beautiful the graphics were, the first few hours told players everything they needed to know, and once that first impression is set, good luck convincing people to come back. Marketing versus reality. On the surface, Inzoi's launch was a marketing masterclass. Krafton didn't just release trailers, they engineered the hype machine, polished cinematic footage, high-quality screenshots, and a steady drip of developer diaries kept anticipations at a fever pitch. Then came the influencer push. The Inzoi created program was rolled out to get YouTubers and streamers on board early. These well-edited videos came out weeks before the game, but the problem is, edited gameplay is a highlight reel. Creators can cut out the boring parts, inject personality through commentary, and make even the most repetitive mechanism look fun. And when the hundreds of these videos hit at once, it's easy for casual viewers to assume that's the real experience, and I know what I'm talking about. I can play The Sims for an hour and the video will end up having 20 minutes as I cut everything that's boring. Anyone that sees my videos will think that, oh, The Sims is a great game. And I'm not speaking only about my videos. everybody that makes The Sims content basically. The gap between trailer and streamer version of Inzoi and the actual hands-on experience was massive, and the marketing did its job. 1.1 million sales in a week. It also set the expectation so high that disappointment was baked in from day one. Stop, really. This video took me a lot of time to make, so if you just wasted 5 seconds of your time, just give it a like. Please, that would mean a lot to me. Also, ring the bell. Community reaction and review bombing. When the initial shine wore off, the Steam reviews walled in, and on paper mostly positive. Sounds great, but look closer and you'll notice something interesting. Even the most positive reviews have caveats. Great potential, needs more. Fun for a few hours, then it gets repetitive. Recommend only if you're okay with early access limitations. A lot of that positivity was based on a game that could be, not what it was. That's a double-edged sword of early access. You get players grading on a potential instead of reality, which can create a false sense of security for developers. And then there's a toxic positivity problem. On the official Discord or subreddit, criticizing the game often got you the same kind of response. It's early access, as if those words magically erased bugs, shallow systems, or missing features. This shielding from criticism is dangerous for any game. It can create an echo chamber where developers only hear praise. We've seen this pattern in other communities like The Sims, where protecting the brand becomes more important than fixing the product. You can see The Sims 4 community is wild about the game. For Inzoi, this meant that the game in the early months, real problems were sometimes drowned out by fan defense campaigns, and without embracing honest, even harsh feedback, turning the ship around becomes a lot harder. Now, just when you thought Inzoi troubles were purely a player count problem, it turns out the game is now tangled in a 250 million lawsuit, and details are very wild. Crafton was basically accused of sabotaging Subnautica 2, so in one of those meetings, Crafton's chief reportedly used Inzoi's launch as an example of success. They boasted about the 1.1 million copies sold in a week, but then privately admitted the truth. Inzoi had significant less content and less developed than Subnautica 2, which was delayed without reason. Think about it for a second. The people in charge of launching Inzoi knew it was bare bones, knew it lacked depth, and still published it into early access anyway. Not because it was ready, but because it was good enough to sell. And here's when it gets more calculated. The lawsuit doesn't spell this out, but if you look at the Sims market, the strategy makes sense. The Sims 4 launched empty back in 2014, yet fans still bought every pack and expansion for years. Crafton likely saw and thought, we can do the same. This community has proven they'll tolerate unfinished games, even if the concept is strong enough. And to be fair, at first it worked for Inzoi's launch numbers, looked incredible on paper. 1 million of sales per week is one kind of stat that you wave in front of the investors, while ignoring the average concurrent players. But those sales came at cost of long-term trust. Once players realized the game didn't deliver to its hype, they bailed. And unlike The Sims, Inzoi didn't have decades of brand loyalty to fall back on. So the lawsuit has done two things. Publicly confirmed what critics were already saying, Inzoi was rushed and underdeveloped, show how little respect Crafton may have for its audience, treating them like low quick sales. But the thing is, you might answer, oh, it was underdeveloped because it's on early access, but that's what I talked about earlier. Not everyone knows what early access means, and they bought the product deliberately, and that caused a lot of problems because they'll never get those players who didn't like the game back, only if they have a brilliant strategy, which I actually doubt they have. Now, talking about the post-launch and problems and directionless development, if you thought things could pick up after launch, they didn't. The updates we've seen so far have been small, cosmetic heavy, and largely surface level. New hairstyles, new furniture, new bug fixes. We'll actually get a new world this week, but I'm talking about the updates prior. But very little that actually depends on the core gameplay, and that's the real problem, the direction. We've seen Inzoi's lead producer on social media openly asking players what they should add next. One hand, community feedback is great. On the other, it's worrying when a game of this scale feels like starting a blank page after launch. Indie themes with a fraction of the budget have released bigger, more meaningful updates in the same time frame. Inzoi has 80 to 90 staff, and yet 4 months in, the gameplay loop that players complained about on day one is still largely untouched. It's created this awkward cycle where players leave because the game feels shallow, updates arrive that focus on cosmetics, those players don't return because the core problem hasn't changed. Every month that passes without a gameplay overhaul gets harder to pull people back. Now, talking about the future of the game. So, everything we covered, they rushed the early access and mispension expectations, the lawsuit bombshells, where does that leave Inzoi? The honest answer? Balancing on a knife's edge. Crafton has a track record when it comes to underperforming games. You have No Man's Sky, you have the Callisto Protocol, which were big budget sci-fi horror games, and after disappointing sales, support was scaled back fast. Moonbreaker, after promising new IP, quietly faded into obscurity. The risk for Inzoi is the same. If the player base and revenue keep shrinking, Crafton could start pulling resources. That means layoffs, reduced marketing, longer gaps between updates. If Krafton and Inzoi team can commit to years of meaningful updates, the game could still turn its flop era into a comeback story. But if they keep prioritizing short-term marketing wins over functional fixes, then Inzoi may never leave the early access, at least not in any form players will care about. So this was the video. I hope you liked it. It took me a lot to make, so I hope you liked this more kind of informational video. I'll be back soon with gameplays and other stuff, and also these informational videos. So please subscribe, ring that bell, you'll receive every notification, okay? So goodbye, simmers.